Hello everyone, it's Ren here. So as you might have seen, recently I released a video on the greatest INFJs who ever lived, the most awesome, the most badass, the most influential, the most everything you want. And in the course of that particular video, you'll have further noticed that I discussed why I hadn't included Jesus Christ among that top three. I felt the need to specify why, because undeniably, insofar as Jesus is going to be included in any ranking, knowing that this exercise is partly done for fun and so on and so forth, it ought to be in the most influential persons who ever lived. There's no way that Jesus is not going to be there. Okay. And that fact can hardly be argued against, I think. But no, the reason why I hadn't included him, and you'll see that when you watch the video, if you haven't yet, is that there's simply too much controversy over Jesus's type. If I'm going to make a ranking of the three greatest INFJs who ever lived, or the three most influential, or the three who had the longest beards, or the three who were the biggest fans of milk, or whatever. It doesn't have to be anything about it grandiose. Well, I need to have, at least in the first instance, a pretty solid conviction that the said individual was INFJ. When it comes to historical figures, you can never be 100% sure. But as a rule of thumb, I think that if you can be 80 to 90% sure, if you feel reasonably sure that that individual is INFJ, for example, or INTP, whatever the case may be, and the community agrees, there needs to be some kind of consensus, right? I don't need to rely on a consensus. If I make a video where I tell you, okay, I think Kierkegaard was INFJ, or I think Nietzsche was INFJ, or I think Heidegger was INFJ, or I think Einstein was whatever, But if I'm going to make a video that literally says, like, these are the most influential INFJs, I sort of have a kind of duty not to mislead my viewers into thinking that my own personal views equate the majority view. I have to be honest about that. And when it comes to Jesus, the majority view is not that clear. It's not clear in the same way that the majority view of Plato is clear, the majority view of the Buddha is clear, and the majority view of the Prophet Muhammad is clear, which is why I included these three in my top three INFJs. I just spoiled you, but the video is still worth checking out, so do check it out. When it comes to Jesus, there's no such consensus. You check online, you'll just be bewildered by the number of perspectives. It's true, I think, that if you were to really look for the most common view, you will see INFJ. But there's a difference between INFJ being the most common view and INFJ being the overwhelming majority view, well argued so as to be difficult to counter. As a matter of fact, the INFJ is only narrowly the majority view, or the most common. It's not the majority view, it's the most common view for Jesus. And it's not argued in such a way as to be difficult to counter. You'll see online, in fact, good arguments, interesting arguments for INFJ, for Jesus being ENFJ. You'll see good arguments for Jesus being INFP. You'll even see good arguments for Jesus being ISFJ. Might seem hard to believe, but you can find these. And what this suggests to me is that Jesus' type is really just, it's either a mystery. I don't want to call it a work in progress, because I don't think there will ever be consensus. It's almost in the nature of the essence of Jesus Christ to resist that easy categorization, or not so easy categorization, just any categorization, full stop. And that you could choose to see as a failure in the matrix. You can choose to see it as a failure in the system, or you could choose to see it as a failed opportunity for lack of evidence, which, I suppose we know Jesus through testimonies of other people, not his own. But you could also see it as something positive in the sense of something being informative. Informative not just about Jesus, but about the question of type. So there's a number of different approaches that, as far as I can tell, that people take when it comes to discussing Jesus's type. So, number one, pretty common approach is to re-argue for a type. So, like I said, you have the people who argue for INFJ, you have the people who argue for INFP, ENFJ, ISFJ, and pretty much, the whole gamut of possible types. Another approach is to say that Jesus, among other things, because he's not just a man, he is also divine, he somehow is all the types at once and all the cognitive functions at once. I'm going to comment on this in a minute. I don't think this is the correct way to look at Jesus' type. I think it's incoherent, and I think that can easily be shown. So I'll show you that in a second. A third approach is to say that Jesus does have a type, but it's not a type that belongs in any neat manner to the usual Jungian cognitive function / MBTI / any other current system we know theory of personality. That Jesus' type exists in a typology that we don't have access to, or that we haven't found out yet, or haven't really approximated it yet. So I want to look at the three views, and then I'll tell you which one I favor. So the first view, like I said, it's the view that is going to seriously defend a particular type for Jesus. And like I was saying, you can have arguments for lots of different types that are interesting, that are compelling, that are thought-provoking, but none has been able to achieve consensus, and not even something remotely resembling consensus. And on these grounds alone, I think it's safe to assume that consensus will not be reached on Jesus' type. So in a way, that's an empirical kind of weakness to that view. That view has an advantage, right? That view has the advantage that insofar as he was also a human being, Jesus interacted with people. In fact, he interacted with a lot of people, and he and his message and his life mattered to a lot of people, even during his lifetime. And he was interacted with as a person, including among those who didn't, think he was anything else than a person. There's nothing to suggest that his behavior toward those people was incoherent, right? And insofar as his behavior was not incoherent, it's tempting to think that his behavior could be articulated inside the category of a type. Because one of the things that a type does as a concept is that it articulates, if you like, a framework through which what you're like, what you do, what you say can be made sense of in a coherent manner, right? And since that's how Jesus appeared to other people, there's a strong temptation to think he was a particular type. Okay, and this leads me to the second view and the problems with it. So the idea that, well, Jesus was fully man, but he was also fully God, and therefore it's incoherent. What's incoherent is that Jesus would have only 4 cognitive functions. Surely if he's also fully God, he has all the cognitive functions. So, say, for those who say he's INFJ, for example, and IFET, the others would say, well, he also has the INFP functions, FI, NE, SI, TE. So he's all the functions, so he's not of a particular type. He's all the types. He's not extroverted, he's not introverted, he's both. You can't be both introverted and extroverted. Doesn't make any sense. It's contradictory. and therefore that view collapses into incoherence. Someone who came across as if they were all the 16 types at once would not actually have behavior that could be intelligible and made sense of in writing by other people or in the testimonies of other people. Right? It would be something that's foul language. And clearly that was not Jesus' case. So I think we can forget about that view. The third view, which says essentially, well, Jesus had a type, which is why his behavior made sense, and people could write about him as someone who had behavior that were coherent and meaningful and purposeful. However, there's a way in which it just doesn't really fit into any of the 16 types we have at our disposal, and it still doesn't fit once we propose to break down every one of the 16 types into subtypes, or into sub-subtypes, or into sub-sub-subtypes. It's just there's something missing. Jesus is more than that. There's something that just cannot quite contain who Jesus was. That's not to say that he is all the types at once, because not only would that be incoherent as we just saw, but in fact, even if it wasn't incoherent, it still wouldn't be quite capturing who Jesus was. So there is a typology, perhaps the typology that's right for Jesus is a divine typology. Right? That doesn't make sense to us because from a human point of view, we're not quite able to capture it. And because we're not able to capture it, we're also not able to even conceive of how such a type that would be outside of the traditional grid of 16 we're familiar with could still be meaningful and intelligible and purposeful to other people in such a way that they could write about him. And in such a way that he could be so relatable and influential on all those, hundreds of generations up to the present day, right? The mystery here would be a mystery related to the divine and the fact that because we're not divine, we cannot quite sense the full breadth of Jesus's type. Like I said, perhaps that type is intelligible only to a divine mind. And the mystery of how that type could be intelligible to humans is a mystery that could be made sense of in Christian terms. Right? So that's probably a Christian perspective. I admit that for an atheist, you see, I think that an atheist would simply reject this because it doesn't make any sense to him. An atheist would, in any case, be encouraged either to see Jesus as not having existed at all or just being a person. If he's not existed, the question is moot. If he was just a person, then the atheist would simply be arguing for one of the 16 types and defend that view as best they can. But for those who are not atheists, that's what I propose. Which version do you find the most appealing yourself? Let me know in the comments, because like I was saying at the start of the video, I think that in this particular case of Jesus' type, there is really, really much we can learn about Jesus and about the whole concept of type and its possibilities, but also its limitations. Okay, like I said, let's continue the conversation in the comments, and I will see you probably next Wednesday, guys? I think so. Okay, take care.